Have you ever had someone try to control your life from a desk? Well, that was Karen, the HOA president in my neighborhood. She fined me again, this time for something ridiculous, swimming in my own lake. $1,000 gone in an instant. She thought I'd sit quietly. She thought I'd obey her rules like everyone else. But she didn't know. I had a plan. By the end of this story, Karen wouldn't just regret fining me, she'd be left speechless. And trust me, the way I turned the tables, it's something she'll never forget. Cut to a dramatic shot of the lake, a fine notice, or a tense look at the HOA office with suspenseful music building. I had always dreamed of living somewhere peaceful. A quiet place, a calm lake, green trees, fresh air. When I finally found this small valley neighborhood, I thought my dream had come true. The houses were beautiful, the lake sparkled in the sun, and the neighbors seemed polite and friendly. Everything looked perfect. At first, it really was. I spent my mornings walking along the lake, reading on my porch, and enjoying the little cabin I had worked so hard to buy. I could finally relax. I could finally feel at home. But like a storm on the horizon, trouble was quietly brewing. That trouble had a name: Karen. Karen was the HOA president. At first, she seemed harmless, a little strict maybe, but harmless. She would sometimes remind neighbors about the rules, like mowing lawns or keeping boats docked properly. But soon, it became clear that Karen didn't just enforce rules, she thrived on control. I remember the first time she came to my house. It was a sunny afternoon. I was out by the lake, enjoying the water, when I saw her walking up the path. She carried a clipboard and had that look, the one that said she was on a mission. "Hi, I'm Karen from the HOA, she said, her smile tight. "I noticed you were swimming in the lake yesterday. That's actually against HOA regulations. You'll need to pay a fine." I froze. Swimming in my lake? My own lake? I stared at her, unsure if she was joking. I live here," I said slowly. "It's my property." She shook her head. "The HOA governs the neighborhood, including the lake. You still need to pay." That was my first fine, $500. I paid it, thinking maybe I had overlooked some small rule. I didn't want trouble. I wanted peace. But the fines kept coming. A slightly overgrown lawn. A mailbox that wasn't perfectly straight. Leaves that fell on my driveway. Karen seemed to watch my every move. Every day, it felt like she was looking for a reason to punish me. It didn't take long for me to realize that this wasn't about rules. This was personal. Karen didn't just want order, she wanted control. She wanted to make me feel small, like she was the one in charge of my life. And the worst part? Most of my neighbors didn't even see it. They accepted her rules without question. I began to feel trapped in my own home. The dream I had worked so hard to achieve had become a nightmare. I tried to avoid conflict. I tried to follow every rule to the letter. But Karen was relentless. She would send emails, leave notices, even knock on my door with a stern expression, always looking for something to fine me for. One evening, after another letter arrived in the mail, a $1,000 fine for something as absurd as swimming in the lake again, I felt my patience snap. I sat on my porch, staring at the water, trying to calm down. My hands shook as I held the envelope. $1,000. Gone. Just for trying to enjoy my home. And Karen thought this was okay. She thought this was justice. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with anger, frustration, and disbelief. How could one person have so much power over me? How could she dictate every little thing I did, even in my own backyard? And most importantly, how could I fight back without losing everything I had worked for? The answer didn't come immediately. I spent days thinking, planning, researching. I read the HOA rules from cover to cover. I talked to neighbors who had experienced Karen's strict enforcement. I realized something important. Karen had power only because no one challenged her. And if I could challenge her, maybe I could turn the tables. It wouldn't be easy. Karen was smart, and she knew the rules better than most residents. But I wasn't going to let fear control me anymore. I had a dream home, and I wasn't going to let one person destroy it. So I made a decision. I wasn't just going to pay the fines. I wasn't just going to follow her ridiculous rules quietly. I was going to fight back. And I would do it strategically. I would use her own rules against her. Little did I know. The plan I was about to put in motion would leave Karen speechless, shock the neighborhood, and finally give me the peace I had been denied for so long. But that was still the future. For now, I just sat there on my porch, staring at the lake, feeling a mix of anger and determination. The dream neighborhood had shown its dark side, and it was time for me to face it head-on. The next few weeks felt like walking on glass. Every time I stepped outside, I felt watched. Every time I opened my mailbox, my stomach tightened, wondering if another fine was waiting for me. And most of the time, there was. At first, I tried to stay calm. I told myself it was temporary, that Karen would eventually get bored or move on to someone else. But she didn't. In fact, it felt like she doubled her efforts. It started with a noise complaint. I remember the moment clearly. It was a Sunday afternoon, quiet and warm, and I was working on a small project in my garage, just organizing tools, cleaning things up, nothing loud. I didn't even have music playing. Suddenly, I heard a knock. Not a gentle one. A sharp, purposeful knock. I opened the door and found Karen standing there, holding her clipboard like a police badge. "There have been noise complaints from your property," she said without greeting me. "Please keep all sound levels under control." I blinked. Noise complaints? From what? I'm literally cleaning. She raised an eyebrow. "These are the guidelines. I don't make the rules." But she did make the rules, or at least, she acted like she did. Still, I nodded, because arguing with her at that moment felt pointless. She walked away without another word. 2 days later, another letter showed up. Violation. Excessive noise. Fine. $250. I couldn't believe it. I felt something burn inside me, anger mixed with disbelief. I wanted to fight back. I wanted to confront her. But I held back, thinking maybe she misunderstood something, or maybe someone genuinely complained. I was wrong. The pattern became clear very quickly. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was targeting me. Personally. Consistently. And with purpose. The next fine came because my lawn was uneven. It wasn't. I had mowed it the day before. I even took a picture just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. It looked normal, healthy, clean, trimmed. But Karen didn't care. She wanted control, and she wanted me to feel it. Another fine came 2 days later. This time, it was about my recycling bin being slightly visible from the street. It wasn't. I walked outside, looked at it from every angle, even asked a neighbor to check. You couldn't see it unless you walked right up to the side of my house. And who would be doing that? Except her. But what really pushed me over the edge came the following week. I had invited my brother over for dinner. Just a quiet evening, grilling outside, enjoying the weather. He parked his car on the street in front of my house, not blocking anything, not breaking any rules. Or so I thought. The next morning, there it was again. Another envelope in the mailbox. Violation. Unauthorized street parking. Fine. $300. I felt my chest tighten. I marched inside, opened the HOA handbook, and read the parking section carefully. It clearly stated that guests were allowed to park on the street as long as they didn't block driveways or fire lanes. My brother hadn't blocked anything. Karen knew that. She fined me anyway. That was the moment something changed inside me. Up until then, I had tried to stay calm. I told myself to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to not turn this into a war. But Karen wasn't interested in peace. She wanted control. She used the HOA like her personal kingdom, and anyone who challenged her, anyone who didn't bow to her rules, became her target. And now, I was her main target. But the universe has a funny way of showing you the truth when you least expect it. One evening, around sunset, I was outside watering the plants near my porch. The air was warm, the sky was a soft orange, and for a moment, I felt a little peace. That's when I noticed two neighbors walking by, the Johnsons, a kind older couple who kept to themselves. They slowed down, exchanged a look, then approached me. "Hey," Mr. Johnson said softly. "Can we talk to you for a moment?" I nodded, turning off the hose. "We noticed you've been getting a lot of visits from Karen lately," Mrs. Johnson said gently. "Are you doing okay?" I let out a slow breath. Honestly, not really. She keeps fining me for things that don't even make sense. They exchanged another look, this time a sad one. "You're not the first," Mr. Johnson said. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "She's done this before," he continued. "Every time a new resident moves in, she tests them, pushes them, tries to see how compliant they are. If she thinks she can control you, she keeps going." Mrs. Johnson nodded. "She did the same thing to us when we moved in 8 years ago. She fined us for a bird feeder, of all things. Claimed it attracted non-native wildlife." I almost laughed. It sounded so absurd, but I could see the tension in their faces. It wasn't funny to them. It was real. "We pushed back," she said quietly. "We fought the fines. And eventually, she backed off." I felt something shift inside me. Hope. Strength. Solidarity. "So you're saying, she won't stop unless she's challenged?" I asked. Mr. Johnson nodded firmly. "Exactly. Karen thrives on people being scared to respond. But she's not invincible. Everything she does has to follow the HOA bylaws. If it doesn't, you can fight it." I thanked them, and after they walked away, I sat on the porch thinking. The pieces were starting to align. Karen wasn't some unstoppable force. She was a bully hiding behind paperwork. She took advantage of people's fear and silence. And suddenly, the idea of fighting back didn't feel impossible anymore. But before I could take any action, things escalated. Fast. 3 days later, a certified letter appeared on my doorstep. Not a regular HOA notice. This one was official, thick envelope, formal stamp, the whole thing. Inside was a violation hearing notice, stating that due to my multiple repeated offenses, the HOA board would be reviewing whether additional penalties should be applied, up to and including property restrictions. Property restrictions. On my own home. My heart dropped. This was no longer about fines. This was serious. This was Karen pushing me into a corner, testing how far she could bend the rules to make my life miserable. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with all the notices spread out. Every fine. Every picture. Every rule she claimed I broke. I felt anger. But beneath the anger, something stronger began to form. Determination. If Karen wanted a fight, I would give her one. But I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to break rules. I wasn't going to lose my cool. I was going to beat her at her own game. I grabbed the HOA bylaws and began reading, slowly, carefully, word by word. I highlighted sections. I made notes. I cross-checked policies. And as I dug deeper, I found something interesting. Something important. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules aggressively. She was breaking them. And she had no idea I was about to discover everything. By midnight, my plan was already taking shape. The revenge wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It wouldn't be childish or petty. It would be clean, strategic, and completely within the rules. It would use her own system against her. And when it was over, she would finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. But that part of the story was still ahead. For now, all I knew was this: Karen had gone too far. And I was done staying quiet. I didn't sleep much after that night. My table was still covered with papers, HOA notices, printed emails, highlighted bylaws, screenshots, everything I could gather. It looked like a detective's workspace, and in a way, that's exactly what it had become. Because at this point, I wasn't just a frustrated homeowner anymore. I was preparing for war. A quiet, legal, strategic war, but a war nonetheless. As I sat there, staring at all the documents, something strange happened. For the first time since Karen started targeting me, I felt calm. Not peaceful, but calm in a focused, determined way. Like I finally understood what I needed to do. And more importantly, how to do it. The first discovery. Karen was breaking her own rules. The first thing I dove into was the HOA bylaws. I read them so many times I started memorizing parts of them. I had sticky notes everywhere, each marking something Karen had overlooked or twisted to fit what she wanted. At first, it was small things. Wording she misquoted. Procedures she didn't follow correctly. Timelines she ignored. But then, I found something big. A section clearly stated that no HOA board member, including the president, may issue fines without approval from at least 2 other board members. That meant every single fine Karen had issued me, every notice, every threat, every invoice, was invalid unless the board had approved it. I checked each notice. Not one had signatures. Not one had documentation of board approval. They were all signed by her alone. Karen wasn't enforcing the rules. She was inventing them. My hands started shaking, not with fear this time, but with excitement. Because this changed everything. This wasn't me fighting against a powerful HOA. This was me exposing one person who misused her authority. Still, I needed proof. Real proof. So I decided to start documenting everything. Step 1. Quiet observation. Over the next week, I watched Karen more closely than she watched me, and believe me, that's saying a lot. Every morning around 9, she walked her usual route with her clipboard, checking mailboxes, lawns, driveways. Sometimes she even peered over fences or into backyards. It was weird. Honestly, it was unsettling. One morning, I walked outside at the same time. She noticed me but pretended not to. I watched her walk straight across the street to the Thompsons' house. Now, the Thompsons had a boat trailer parked in their driveway, and according to the HOA guidelines, trailers were only allowed for 48 hours. They'd had theirs parked for a week. I expected Karen to pounce. But she didn't. She just smiled, waved at Mrs. Thompson, and kept moving. That was it. No fine. No notice. Nothing. I stood there quietly, my mind spinning. This wasn't random enforcement. It was selective enforcement. She wasn't applying rules equally, which was a major violation of HOA policy. Selective enforcement alone was enough to get a board member removed. And Karen had no idea I was collecting evidence of it. Step 2. Talking to neighbors. After my conversation with the Johnsons, I realized something important. I wasn't alone. And if Karen had targeted others in the past, maybe they still had old notices, emails, complaints, anything that proved her history of overstepping. So, I started talking. Not in a gossiping way. Not in a dramatic way. Just casual conversations at the mailbox, during evening walks, or when taking out the trash. I spoke to Mrs. Wallace, who lived on the corner. She showed me a fine she got last year for having non-compliant flowers in her garden. She said Karen eventually dropped the fine after neighbors started talking about it. I spoke to the Millers, who told me Karen once cited them for having a decorative item on their porch. It was a small ceramic bird. I spoke to the young couple down the street who said they no longer attended HOA meetings because Karen always shut them down. Every story was different, but every pattern was the same. Karen used her position to intimidate people. She used fear to stay in control. But she wasn't prepared for someone who wasn't scared anymore. Step 3. Tracking Karen's own violations. This part was, honestly, kind of satisfying. If Karen wanted to talk about rules, then she should follow them too. Right. So, I printed the entire HOA rulebook again, this time, just to track her violations. And oh, She had plenty. For one, her trash bins were visible from the street, an automatic violation. Her backyard fence was 2 inches higher than allowed. Her holiday lights stayed up well past the removal deadline. She had a decorative flagpole on her porch, which was against the guidelines unless approved. And the biggest one. Her own home had not passed the required annual exterior inspection. You can imagine my smile when I realized that the woman who fined others for the smallest details hadn't followed half the rules herself. But again, I didn't confront her. I didn't gloat. I didn't even mention it. Because the time for confrontation would come later, at the hearing she scheduled. And I needed to be prepared. Step 4. Digging into HOA records legally. Any homeowner has the right to request HOA documents, meeting minutes, voting records, approval lists, financial reports. Most people don't know this. But I did my research. So one morning, I sent a polite email to the HOA board requesting copies of fine approvals, meeting minutes from the last 12 months, records of issued warnings, details of all board member votes, annual financial statements. I kept the email friendly and professional. 2 hours later, I got a reply, not from the HOA board, but from Karen. Her message was short and irritated. These documents are not necessary for your hearing. We will discuss your violations then. She was wrong. Legally wrong. But her frustration told me one thing: she had something to hide. So I didn't reply. Instead, I sent the same request again, but this time, copied the entire board and quoted the exact bylaw number giving me the right to obtain those documents. That afternoon, the treasurer emailed me the files I requested. And what I found inside changed everything. The records that exposed her. As I read through the files, a clear picture began to form. Not a single one of my fines had board approval. None of them. Not one. Every fine I received had been issued by Karen alone, without proper procedure, without review, without signatures. Worse, Karen never even logged half of them in the HOA's official records. She created them privately, outside the system, then delivered them to me as if they were official. That wasn't poor enforcement. That was abuse of power. It was grounds for removal. And potentially grounds for legal action. I sat back, staring at the documents, letting the weight of it sink in. She had been misusing her authority for years. Quietly, confidently, believing no one would question her. And honestly, no one had. Until now. But the most shocking discovery wasn't about my fines. It was about hers. Because buried in the financial reports was a line showing administrative expense reimbursements, all authorized by Karen. Thousands of dollars. Paid to herself. For HOA supplies. For administrative duties. For unrecorded enforcement activity. There were no receipts attached. No itemized lists. Just vague descriptions with large payments. I felt my jaw tighten. This wasn't just micromanaging or overstepping. This looked like someone using the HOA as her personal wallet. And the board had no idea. This was bigger than a feud. This was corruption. And I knew right then, if I presented this correctly, I wouldn't just fight her. I would remove her. Step 5. The revenge begins. My plan was simple. Not dramatic. Not loud. Not petty. Just pure, clean justice. At the hearing Karen scheduled for me, I would present every invalid fine, every selective enforcement incident, photos of her own violations, records of unapproved actions, evidence of financial misuse, neighbor testimonies, a complete list of policy violations, and I wouldn't demand anything. I would simply ask the board to enforce the rules equally, rules Karen had broken repeatedly. And once everything was laid out, Karen would have no defense. She would be forced to step down, or they would vote her out. Either way, my revenge would be complete. But as prepared as I was, nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Because before I even made it to the hearing, Karen made a mistake that changed the entire outcome. And she didn't even know it. I woke up the next morning earlier than usual. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something calm. For the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I didn't wake up wondering what new fine Karen had left in my mailbox. I didn't wake up stressed about whether she'd stalk my backyard again. I didn't wake up preparing myself for another confrontation. The night before had changed everything. And today would change even more. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and sat on the porch. The lake was completely still, like a sheet of glass. The kind of morning that should have felt peaceful. But underneath that peace, something heavy lingered. The HOA had never been this quiet. Not once. So when things suddenly go silent, you know a storm is coming. I checked my phone. 7 new emails. All from neighbors. Most said something like, "Hey, heard there's some trouble with the HOA? What's going on? Is it true Karen filed fake fines? We need to talk. Something's not right." People were finally waking up. And honestly, it was about time. I didn't respond yet. I had one thing to do first. At 9 a.m. sharp, the HOA held an emergency board meeting. And I knew exactly why. My formal complaints, my evidence folders, the emails I sent to the compliance officer, they had all landed in their inboxes at once. They couldn't ignore me anymore. They couldn't hide behind excuses. And they definitely couldn't pretend Karen was just following procedure. Not today. So I grabbed my binder, the one filled with photos of my lake, timestamps, unfair fines, and proof of selective enforcement, and walked toward the clubhouse. The walk felt long, like the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. When I reached the entrance, I saw a crowd already gathered. At least 15 neighbors stood outside, talking in low voices. Some looked angry. Some looked confused. But all of them looked tired. Tired of the HOA. Tired of the drama. Tired of Karen. As soon as they saw me, a few people came straight over. "Is it true she fined you for swimming in your own lake?" "Yes." "And she charged you $1,000? "Yep." "And she changed rules without the board's approval?" "More than once." They looked at each other, some shaking their heads, others muttering under their breath. One older neighbor, Mr. Peterson, said, "I've lived here 12 years. This place wasn't like this before she became president." Before I could respond, the clubhouse doors opened. Karen stepped out. And she looked different. Her posture wasn't stiff. Her expression wasn't confident. She looked pale, nervous, like someone who finally realized the house of cards she built was collapsing. She held a stack of papers to her chest like a shield. "We're starting the meeting," she said quietly. Nobody moved. Nobody responded. The silence made her uncomfortable. She repeated, louder this time, "The meeting is starting." Still, no one walked in. Then finally, one neighbor said, "We'll go in when he does," pointing at me. Karen's eyes snapped toward me. Not with anger this time. With fear. She stepped aside, avoiding eye contact, and we all walked in. The meeting room was small but packed. Folding chairs were lined up in rows. The board members sat at a long table at the front, papers scattered everywhere. They looked stressed, confused, irritated, like they had no idea how things spiraled this far. I took a seat in the front row. Karen sat in the center seat, clearing her throat like she was trying to regain authority. "Let's begin." This meeting was scheduled to address the accusations brought forth by. She looked at the paper. She knew my name. She just didn't want to say it. The treasurer, Mrs. Collins, finally spoke up. "By the homeowner living at 17 Lakeside." Everyone turned toward me. Karen inhaled sharply. "Yes. Those accusations include claims of fabricated fines, failure to follow internal procedures, and unauthorized changes to HOA rules." A wave of murmurs spread through the room. Karen quickly raised her hand to silence them. "We'll begin by letting the board know." Everyone turned. It was me. "I'd like to speak first." Karen opened her mouth, about to protest. But Mrs. Collins cut in. "I think that's reasonable." Karen froze. She didn't like being overruled. Not even in something this small. I stood up and placed my binder on the small podium near the front. I took a small breath. My voice had to stay calm. Steady. Clear. "For the last several months," I began, "I've been fined for things that have never been against our HOA rules. Landscaping. A mailbox. Noise violations. And most recently, for swimming in my own lake." The room erupted in confused whispers. "Your own lake? What, she fined you for that? That's ridiculous. That's not even possible." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "Order." But the room didn't quiet down until the treasurer spoke again. "Let him continue." I nodded. "Thank you." I opened the binder. This is a copy of the HOA rulebook from last year. And this is the updated version. I held both up. They're different. And these changes were never voted on. The neighbors leaned forward. The board members exchanged nervous glances. And here, I pulled out photos. Are timestamps proving that Karen entered my backyard multiple times without notice or permission. More gasps. Here's footage from my security camera showing her taking photos of me near the lake, even though she knew the property belonged to me. I placed the printed screenshots on the table. The board stared at them in silence. And this, I pulled out one last paper, is the $1,000 fine she issued for simply swimming. A neighbor yelled, "This is abuse of power. Plain and simple." Another added, "We've complained before and she ignored us." Voices rose. People stood. Anger spread like fire. Karen slammed her fist again. Everybody calmed down. But this time, nobody listened. She panicked and looked at the board. "This is being blown out of proportion. He has a history of..." "Stop lying." My voice cut through everything. She froze. I continued. "You told the neighbors I was violating dozens of rules. You told them I was dangerous, irresponsible, disrespectful. You never showed a single proof. You never followed procedure. You targeted me. You harassed me. And you crossed every boundary an HOA president is required to respect." Karen's lips trembled. The treasurer spoke next. And her words were cold. "Karen, we reviewed the documents he sent yesterday. And after comparing them to our records, we found major discrepancies." Even the secretary nodded. "Significant discrepancies." Karen stiffened. "You're believing him over me?" "We're believing the evidence," the treasurer replied. The room fell silent. You could feel the tension gripping every wall. Then the board vice president spoke, slowly, almost reluctantly. "Karen, until this investigation is finished, we're suspending your authority as HOA president." A wave of shock moved through the room. Neighbors gasped. Some cheered under their breath. Karen's face drained of all color. You can't do that," she whispered. "We just did," the treasurer said. Karen stood up so fast her chair fell backward. She grabbed her papers, stumbled toward the exit, shoved the door open, and disappeared outside. The room erupted with noise again, relief, anger, celebration, but I just stood there, quiet. It wasn't the final victory yet. But it was the moment everything turned. And deep inside, I knew. The truth was finally winning. And Karen. She had just lost the one thing she cared about most. Control. The days after the hearing were surreal. The neighborhood felt different. Lighter. Somehow freer. People smiled more when they passed me on the street. Conversations weren't whispered behind closed doors, they were open, honest. And slowly, the weight that Karen had carried over the entire neighborhood was lifting. For me, the relief was immediate. Walking outside without fear of being fined for every tiny thing felt almost unbelievable. It had been months of anxiety, stress, and constant vigilance, and suddenly, that tension had disappeared. But the victory wasn't just personal, it was public. Within a week, the HOA board officially suspended Karen. A temporary suspension, yes, while a full investigation was underway, but the suspension alone was enough to change the dynamic. She could no longer issue fines, monitor backyards, or intimidate neighbors. For the first time, she was powerless. I remember driving past her house that week. The mailbox she had so obsessively inspected sat crooked, unnoticed. Her yard was messy, and for the first time in years, no one cared. That simple sight, ordinary, almost mundane, felt like a symbol of justice. Karen's reaction. Karen didn't take the suspension well. The first time she called me after the hearing, I didn't answer. She left a voice message that was tense, half angry, half desperate. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you have no right to humiliate me like this. Everyone knows I'm the president. Without me, this HOA would fall apart." I didn't respond. And that was the point. Karen thrived on attention. She wanted everyone to know she was in charge. But now, without her authority, without her little army of fearful neighbors, she had no leverage. And she hated it. Neighbors told me she tried to rally support behind the scenes, but almost everyone had seen the evidence. They had seen the facts laid out at the hearing. And no one defended her. Not a single person. For the first time, Karen realized that rules weren't hers to manipulate. They belonged to the community, and I had used them exactly as intended. How the HOA changed after Karen's suspension. The board immediately started reviewing all the fines she had issued. Every single one. My binder, filled with photos, emails, and documented violations, was presented as evidence. And what did they find? Hundreds of fines were invalid. Many were never properly approved. Several were issued without notice or explanation. And a small portion even violated the HOA's own bylaws. The board had no choice. Karen's authority was officially stripped, and a replacement president was elected from the neighborhood, a fair, reasonable person who valued transparency and equality. The HOA rules themselves were reviewed, rewritten, and clarified to prevent another situation like mine from ever happening again. And the lake, the lawns, the mailboxes? Everything returned to a state of calm normalcy. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but to me, it was enormous. I could finally enjoy my home without fear. I could finally walk my dogs, swim in the lake, and relax in my own backyard without feeling like someone was plotting against me. Neighbors reclaimed their voice. The most rewarding part wasn't just my victory, it was watching the neighborhood come alive again. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now spoke up in meetings. People who had quietly obeyed unfair rules finally asked questions. For the first time in years, the HOA felt like a community rather than a dictatorship. I remember Mrs. Wallace coming over one afternoon, her eyes bright with gratitude. "You did this," she said, shaking her head. "You gave us all the courage to speak. We were scared for so long, and you reminded us, rules aren't meant to scare people. They're meant to protect everyone." I smiled, feeling the weight of months of stress finally lift. It wasn't just about me. It was about every neighbor who had felt powerless, frustrated, or unheard. Karen had built fear into this neighborhood like a wall. And now that wall had crumbled. The sweet revenge doesn't always have to be dramatic. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it's legal. Sometimes, it's just about proving the truth. And that's exactly how this worked. I never shouted at Karen. I never embarrassed her in front of the neighbors. I didn't throw tantrums or post nasty messages online. I simply collected evidence, followed the rules, and let the system do the work. And it worked. There's a special satisfaction in seeing someone who thrived on controlling others finally face the consequences of their actions. But the satisfaction wasn't about humiliation, it was about justice. About fairness. About standing up for myself and for the neighborhood. And yes, watching Karen leave the meeting room that day, pale and defeated, clutching her papers, was a moment I'll never forget. Life after Karen slowly returned to normal. I spent more mornings by the lake, more afternoons in the garden, and evenings with neighbors without worrying about surveillance or fines. I even hosted a small barbecue one weekend. People came from all over the neighborhood, sharing laughs, stories, and relief. It was like a weight had been lifted from the entire community. And the best part, I finally felt like I belonged, not just in my home, but in my neighborhood. The fight with Karen taught me something important. Standing up for yourself doesn't have to be reckless or aggressive. It doesn't have to be loud or chaotic. Sometimes, it's about preparation, patience, and persistence. Sometimes, it's just about knowing your rights and refusing to let fear control your life. A lesson learned looking back, I realized how much this experience had changed me. I had gone from a frustrated, powerless homeowner to someone confident, informed, and ready to defend what was rightfully mine. I had learned the importance of community, transparency, and courage. And I had learned that rules, when applied fairly, protect everyone. Karen will probably continue to live in the neighborhood. She'll probably try to regain some influence in the future. But now, she won't succeed. Not anymore. Because the neighborhood has learned the truth. And I've learned that even one person, armed with facts, fairness, and determination, can make a difference. The takeaway, if there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. No one should be able to make you feel powerless in your own home. Rules are there for fairness, not fear. And sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't just about revenge, it's about justice, dignity, and reclaiming your life. I didn't destroy Karen. I didn't humiliate her publicly. I didn't need to. I simply followed the rules. I documented the truth. And I let the system do the rest. And in the end, the neighborhood, my home, and my peace were all restored. That's the real victory.